Okay, everyone, welcome. Um, Before we begin, we have an inspiring event planned for you today, but before we begin, I'd like to introduce Savandi Silva, who will be doing our land acknowledgement. Savandi is a fourth-year environmental management student and currently works as the special projects assistant in the experiential education office. Savandi, I turn it over to you.
So hi everyone, as this meeting is virtual and we are not all gathered in the same space, I recognize that this land acknowledgement might not be for the territory that you are currently on. And if this is the case, we ask that you take the responsibility to acknowledge the traditional territory that you are on and the current treaty holders. As a member of the York University community, I recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Takaronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dishwit-Wanspoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. Thank you.
Thank you, Savandi. I encourage everyone to take the time to research and understand which land they reside on and support Indigenous communities either by educating yourself or giving to Indigenous initiatives and or businesses. As mentioned, we have a great event planned out for you today. First, we'll hear from our wonderful 5 panelists who will be sharing their experiences with failure in their own academic, personal, and professional life. And then we'll be taking a break and transitioning into a speed mentoring session where you'll be split into breakout rooms to have more intimate discussions with our panelists and ask more questions that you might have. We do have some housekeeping rules. Please ensure that your mics are turned off during the session. When we enter the Q&A portion, you can submit your questions via chat or by raising your hand. You can raise your hand by clicking on the participants tab at the bottom and then clicking the blue hand. So first we're going to be doing our panel and then we're going to have a Q&A, a small break, then the speed networking session. So first, I'd like to introduce our wonderful panelists. I'd like to thank them for taking their time out of their day today, for being with us and sharing their own personal experiences. I know from my own self, it's not easy sharing some of our setbacks, but as someone who has experienced failure in their life, as an undergrad student, I did fail a course. I've had some setbacks of my own. And, sometimes our anxieties get the best of us and we think, we can't do this just because we have this setback or a roadblock, but it's more of a lesson learned. It teaches us what didn't go well and what went right, and then gives us an opportunity to take another attempt at, getting through that process and learning from our own experiences. So, first today on our panelists, I first want to introduce Dean Alice Hovorka. Alice is a professor and dean at our very own Faculty of Environmental and Urban Change at York University. She earned her PhD in geography from Clark University in 2003 and became a Humboldt Research Fellow in 2009. Her research program broadly explores human-environment relationships with specializations in animal geographies, gender and environment, urban geography, Southern Africa, and the scholarship of teaching and learning. As dean at York University, she is focused on enhancing experiential education, research excellence, and international partnerships in the realm of environmental and urban change. Next, we have Professor Stephen Tufts. Stephen Tufts is an associate professor in the Faculty of Environmental and Urban Change in the Global Geography program. He works with and researches labor unions in North America. Third, we have Jennifer Ferdinands. Jennifer is actually is our alumni and events officer at the Faculty of Environmental and Urban Change. She has an educational background in marketing. She did her BCom. She's also geography alumni. She did her BA summa cum laude and has a master in education. She has worked in multiple units across campus at York University over the past 12 years. In all her endeavors, both professional and personal, the quote that guides her work is, "It is only the giving of oneself to others that we truly live." Ethel Percy Andrus. Jen relishes any opportunity to serve, help, and add value to people and projects by taking action with great love, empathy, and commitment. In her spare time, you'll find her volunteering her skills and strengths to support projects and initiatives focused on social justice and cultivating the values of kindness, generosity, respect, and love in her most precious blessings. And her most precious blessings are her daughter, Emma, and husband, Kyle. Next, we have Miranda Baksh. Miranda Baksh is a climate action catalyst and one of York University's top 30 change makers under 30 who are making a difference in the world. She obtained her master's in environmental studies from York University and is a volunteer CEO and co-founder of the Community Climate Council. Her passion for biodiversity conservation led her to study research climate change impacts in Costa Rica and Belize, which brought her closer to local climate justice and activism. While she is in school, she taught French at a local private school and was an environmental educator with the TRCA. Outside of volunteering and work, she enjoys hiking, gardening, and all things outdoors. Last, we have Erin Isaac. Erin Isaac graduated in June from the Faculty of Environmental and Urban Change with a degree in environmental management and a certificate in cultural and artistic practices for environmental and social justice. She is currently employed as a communications specialist at ZooShare Biogas Co-op, a renewable energy not-for-profit organization based in Toronto. Next year, she will be pursuing her master's in the field of conservation and restoration ecology. Erin is passionate about eco-arts and enjoys hiking, gardening, and bird watching. So I'd like to welcome our 5 panelists. So first, we'll just jump right into our questions. Let me just stop share. Awesome. So the first question we have is, and this is for all the panelists, what were some challenging moments you went through as a student or personally that affected you academically? How did you find the motivation to keep moving during these times, or how did you stay inspired? Perhaps I'll start with Miranda.
Thanks, Rosanna. It's definitely a tough question, but I love the concept of this entire panel discussion. I think it's not something spoken about enough. And it's really important to recognize that we all fail, and failure is a part of the process. And yeah, I think I've definitely, failed a course or two in high school. I've dropped a course in undergrad because I just didn't feel like I was doing the best. When I got my first mark, I was like so discouraged. I was like, nope, I can't continue like that. But yeah, like my mentality definitely changed and shifted. Specifically, I'll talk about my minor in French studies. So I always loved French, always wanted to speak a second language, and I pursued it as my minor. And it didn't really love me back the same way. My grades were not ideal. I got one of those beautiful letters saying like, hey, you have a couple chances left to improve your grades. Otherwise, we're going to have to like talk to you about your marks. And I was so terrified because I truly was trying my best. I was working really hard. And, sometimes you just kind of think like, am I not getting this? Like, what is going on here? And if it wasn't for the support of family and friends saying like, hey, still go for it, like you still really always wanted this, do it. I kind of was getting all of these signs that it wasn't the right thing for me and it was dropping my GPA, but something in me just wanted to prove that I could do it despite how bad it was, that I said, you know what, let's just keep trying. So I like got extra help from profs. I even had actually quite negative experiences with some professors who said like, you know, like, I think you should just stop. Like, this is horrible. I think oh, she asked me if I wrote it on my cell phone, I remember, even though I worked very hard on this essay. So like, there were a lot of tribulations along the way. And still, I wanted to persevere. I wanted to keep going. And so I just did it, and it just seemed like the wrong thing to do because I was getting all the signs to stop. And something happened where it honestly clicked, and I was starting to get it. I had professors who started to really inspire me and support me and really saw success from the beginning. And I think that's really what helped. Just having professors who believe in you. I had a supportive boyfriend at York University as well. He was like, don't quit. My family as well didn't want me to give up. They said, you've stuck with it for so long since high school. Why stop now? And I think that's something that a lot of students can think of when they get to points like that. Just ask yourself, why stop now? You've gotten this far. Keep going. I ended up being my minor, and like you heard in the bio, I ended up teaching French to elementary students and pursuing one of my dreams. So it's definitely a rewarding feeling when you can like prove people in the past wrong who thought you would have given up, and you come out stronger through it.
Definitely. And I think I share some similar experiences with like, you know, failing courses and just feeling like it was the end of the world. I never shared that I failed any course in my life until maybe 2 years ago when I started feeling comfortable sharing that. And, you know, having a supportive community, whether it's your friends, family, or significant other, is a very important aspect of it. Maybe now we'll move on to Dean Hovorka.
Thank you, Rosanna. And I think I'm going to continue on a similar thread that Miranda started us off at. So I was thinking about failure within kind of the undergraduate, graduate kind of studies phase of my career. And, you know, so I'll talk a little bit about the key failures and then a little bit of why they happened, I think, and how I set myself up for failure, and then where I kind of went with that. So I'll give you three very quick examples. When I was applying to bachelor's degrees, I was coming out, I was a top student in high school, but I was not top enough. And I remember the last few years of high school, I just was like, I'm tired of being the smart kid, and yeah, you know, I'm not going to try that hard. And as a result, I didn't get the 94 it took to get into Queen's Commerce, which is what I thought I wanted to do. I thought I wanted to make money. That was it. I'm going to make money. And that's all I kind of knew or thought of myself at the time. I didn't get into Queen's Commerce, still went to Queen's, but I went into a general arts and science degree. And, you know, if you're not going to do commerce, why not try economics? Again, those two really don't match, by the way. But anyway, I went into economics, and I sat there on my first day of economics, and I said, I turned to the person next to me and I said, do you like this? And I just could not imagine 4 years of this. And so I left and I thought, wow, so I have not succeeded at this point in getting to what I thought I wanted to do. And so I looked at my course calendar, they were in print at the time, and I looked to see what could I fit into this schedule. Lo and behold, next door was a human geography class, and I never turned back. And I think part of this was, you know, a couple things. I decided that I didn't want to work hard. I decided that I was tired of having expectations on me to be the best student. And I thought, I'm going to take a break. And that almost cost me getting into what I wanted to do. And it actually did cost me in getting what I wanted to do, but then I didn't realize that that's not what I wanted to do. So one of these things about failure is that it really reorients your choices. Or reorients where you start to head. And for me, I happened to fall into a field of study that I love. And I think like Miranda had shared and Rosanna had shared around the various disastrous undergraduate courses, I remember sitting down at my first year calculus final, looking at the exam, and I was going in with a really high grade. I looked at the exam and I thought, am I at the wrong seat? Because the way I'd studied, I had failed in studying properly for that exam. And I looked and I panicked. I was like, is this calculus 1000? They're like, yeah. And I failed that exam. My mark went down from like a 90 to, I failed the exam, it was 60% of the grade, you know, I just passed, etc. And I think part of it, the failures, I think, that I'm describing to you are ones where I felt like I either felt like I didn't want to put in the effort or I didn't have to put in the effort. So that calculus course, I remember an astronomy course. Yeah, gee, I'm smart, I can do astronomy. No, you can't. Astronomy is really hard because guess what? Physics, math. And so part of it was kind of understanding who you are and what your strengths are. And yeah, I'm smart, but I have to work for it and I have to put in the time and energy. So those are some thoughts right now.
Thanks for sharing, Alice. It's very important. Like, as I mentioned, like, you know, it's not a brick wall there. You have to keep trying. So keep trying and finding what worked well, what didn't work well is very important in helping you overcome those types of setbacks. I think now I'm going to just turn it over to our recent graduate, Erin Isaac. She just graduated from our faculty in June. How about you share your experiences with us?
Yeah. Okay. Hi, everyone. So, failure. I basically navigated, this is a new perspective on failure from me, but I basically navigated most of my educational career with an undiagnosed medical condition that seriously affected my ability to learn in the way that I thought I should be learning. While I was going through university, I was not actively aware of the medical reasons behind some of my challenges. So I just spent a lot of time really like blaming myself and feeling really horrible and just feeling like I was a bad student and there's just no way that I could get things right. So I got diagnosed with ADHD at the end of my last semester of university. But it was really life-changing for me. But before I got treatment and a diagnosis, I spent a lot of time finding coping strategies to push through the many struggles that I was struggling with, like my inability to focus and my scatteredness and the feelings of imposter syndrome and like generally low educational self-esteem due to the fact that I'd just been doing badly in school since I was literally 6 years old. So I've just gone through like decades of being regarded as like a lazy and a bad student. And like regardless of whether I got my diagnosis or not, like I was going to have to figure out how to succeed with these challenges. And I did. I graduated with really good grades at the end of it, but it took me like decades to figure it out. So I'd say that two things that I personally learned that helped me go from failing 3 courses in first year to graduating cum laude in my final year was basically like, I learned a lot about what my limits were in first year. I made the decision that I should finally start honoring my limits instead of trying to push myself past them because it's not going to work. So one of the things I did was I made sure to take a lighter course load than most of my friends, and it made me feel bad because I was like, I'm going to have to do summer school. I might have to do an extra year of university and my friends don't have to do that. Why am I such a failure? But I realized that taking 5 courses was just not going to work for me. So I started taking 4 courses and it was really doable and my grades definitely reflected that. And my second tip that really helped me or trick was that I made a point to always have at least 1 course in my semester that I genuinely enjoyed, even if it was like an elective that brought me like joy and like made me recognize that education isn't just boring slideshows and endless lecture halls. Like education can really be an opportunity for me to explore ideas and topics that I find personally fun and exciting while I'm still trying to achieve my goal of getting my degree. So, yeah.
Thanks, Erin. It takes a lot of courage to share those types of experiences. And I like that you mentioned mental health. I think that's a huge thing that a lot of us can resonate with. I deal with anxiety in my undergrad. Part of the reason I failed some of my courses was my chronic illness, and I didn't know how to balance that type of life. So it's very important to know about the resources you have at the university, like, you know, your academic advisors, your professors, peer mentors. You know, if there's someone that you can confide in, talk to them and find out the different resources that you can take advantage of in your journey through academics. Now I'm going to turn it over to Professor Tufts.
Okay, thanks, Rosanna. Yeah, funny how we often have shared experiences. I too went to university, McGill University in the early 90s, planning to take economics, as Dean Hovorka did. And I didn't. I actually stopped going to class. I found out the professor was simply reading from the textbook. I sort of read the textbook, it was 100% final. I got a B in the first half of the course. And I decided I'm not going to go to any classes for the second half of economics. I'll teach myself the textbook again. And I got a B plus. So I think probably going to class in that rare instance, in the way they taught back in the early 1990s, that discipline, well, it didn't work for me. So I took geography because the classes were smaller. There was passive learning and active learning in the way that the instructors interacted with students. And that just worked for me. And I think learning and deviating from that first plan I had was the first step I learned that it's okay to take chances and not follow the plan exactly. Now, in all my other courses, I mean, I was an above average student. Most of us who are in academia are, at least at some points in our career, but we're not always at the top level all the way through. Some people have really different learning curves and excel at different types of learning in their careers. Some don't do well in undergrad, do really well in grad school. Some struggle in grad school after doing really well in undergrad. Everyone's different. But I think one thing that helped me was I started talking to other students, and I realized a few things. One is that all their grades weren't that great. We were all used to getting A's and A pluses, and in university, that doesn't happen. So that's the first thing. And sometimes you struggle. Second is that some of the students I was talking to in the same course in the first year were third and fourth year students. They had experience and that I didn't have, so I was competing with them, and no wonder they were doing better than me. And the third thing I learned is being the first person to go to university in my family from a small city in Ontario and to a university that was a little bit difficult to get into at that time, was that I just wasn't as trained as well as some of my other students. I had friends who went to Upper Canada College, who went to private schools whose largest classes might have been 12. And that gave them another advantage as well. So I started putting this all together. I realized that some of my not getting the grades I was used to might actually be normal. That might actually be what's expected here. And then, of course, the grades improved as I went through my undergraduate career. But I think that's the message here, is that the problem isn't always you, it's them. And it's a system where failure is actually part of it. And realizing those differences and the advantages that other people have is something that you can really take a little bit of pressure off yourself with. Okay.
Some great takeaways, Professor Tufts, like knowing that if you have a plan, it doesn't have to go that way. Sometimes the plan changes, and it's great. It's helpful if you take risks and chances to see something else that might work for you. And I love that you said that sometimes the system is there for failure. Like, I'm studying education right now. I'm doing my master's in education, and in terms of our learning abilities, we all learn in a different way. You mentioned passive learning and active learning and stuff like that. Sometimes courses aren't developed in that way that might suit your learning ability. We have, examples of ADHD and stuff like that. So you have to find out a way that works best for you. So finding those types of courses or doing research on how that course is being taught will be helpful in helping you become more successful. I'm going to turn it over to Jen now to share her experience.
Thanks so much, Rosanna. Thanks, everyone. I'll try and keep it super, super brief. There's three examples that stand out to me where I feel like I failed or near failed, but it's shaped my life in a way that I am here where I am today. And so the first is high school. So trying to transition from high school to university, I'd actually lost my aunt, and my aunt was really close to me. She was like a mother, a sister, and a best friend all rolled into one. And her death was fast and furious. Like it was 4 months that it happened, and it sent me reeling. Like I was an A+ student. I stopped going to school. I stopped eating. Like it was tough. And when it came time for applying to universities, the guidance counselors were like, "Yeah, Jen, it's the double cohort year. Maybe think about applying to universities outside Ontario because you won't get in." At that point, my parents and they, they encouraged me, and I got a lot of letters of support from my parish priest, from my doctor, who'd known me over all these years, and seeing that support like allowed me to believe in myself that like I could pull myself up from this. So I did, and I managed to get into York. So this was a good thing. But while I was at York, I wanted to become a teacher. And so I applied to Teachers College, and guess what? I didn't get in. So that was really tough for me because I thought to myself, oh man, I really wanted to teach. But what it caused me to do, look at my strengths and look at my passions, what I was good at. And I recognize now, looking back many, many years, is that teaching can be very different. You can teach in many different shapes. It doesn't have to be formal. And so I have the opportunity to teach all the time. And then the last example that I have is when I was going through my master's, and I thought for sure I want to write a thesis. And so years were going by, and I was passionate about it when I first started. And it came to a point when I was sitting down to write, and I'd already written some parts of it. And I looked at the computer screen and I said, I'm not having this. It's not for me. I'm not happy. I've lost my passion. And it felt like a failure at the time, but it was the right decision because of how I thought it would impact me if I kept going. And so for me, I think to cope through these points of failure is to change your perspective and be okay with nonlinear trajectories. We often learn, you're supposed to do this, 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 and this, but it's okay to stray a little bit. I think you learn a little bit more about yourself when you do that. So those are my examples.
Thanks for sharing, Jen. It's great to recognize transferable skills. So Jen wanted to go into teaching, and she didn't get into teaching college, but then she was able to teach others. And she teaches me all the time. I work closely with Jen, and I've learned a lot from her. So recognizing where you can take those skills that you've once had, if one path is not working, there are many other paths that you can take with that. So I'm just going to move on to our second question. And this one is for any of the panelists who are active on social media. So many people prefer portraying a perfect life on social media and are secretive of their failures. This creates a sense of pressure, mostly for the younger generation who don't effectively know how to overcome failure. How do you deal with these stereotypes and social pressures? And this is an open one for anyone who wants to answer.
I can go for it. As a disclaimer, I uninstalled Instagram for the past like 2 or 3 weeks, and it's been beautiful. Highly recommend. You just realize like how much information you're consuming constantly, and like you constantly feel like it's an overload of information. You're really passionate about issues you're seeing around the world. Maybe you're seeing news that's making you really upset or sad, and it's just constantly filling your mind. And then I was like, I'm feeling all these emotions about things that aren't actually in my current reality in the present moment. And it's actually like so much consumption of information that I just need to take a pause from it. So highly recommend that. But back to the original question. So the way I use social media is that I love to post things of friends and family that like make me happy, things that are highlights. It's kind of like a photo album digitally is how I see it, like a scrapbook. So if you think about it, back in the day when you might have like flipped through a photo album at a friend's house, you're always looking at those like really nice memories, whether it be like of vacations or their family, things like that. So when I see other people posting, I treat it that way. I look at it as their personal photo album. It isn't reality. You're not seeing them in their pajamas rolling out of bed in the afternoon. You're not seeing the stresses or heartbreaks that people are going through. It truly is just snapshots of highlights of great moments. And I think it's really important to remember that it is not reality. It's not real life. And there's just so much more to those pictures than you might ever know. For example, I remember like if there are times where I'm going through struggles and I'm just like really going to post a beautiful photo of my family and I, for example, You know, it might look like, yay, wow, Miranda's on vacation, but really it's like, I would just love to reflect on that photo throughout the day to kind of give me a pick-me-up. So you also don't really know the context or reason behind why people post what they post. So I think just keeping that in mind is so important.
Thanks, Miranda. I think a detox from social media, it helps me because sometimes what I first did when I realized social media was bringing me down was I started removing negative type of content. Like if I see people arguing about stuff and things like that, and I started putting more social causes on my timeline and things. But then I started getting depressed about the news that's happening, and I was just like, oh my god, now I need inspiration. So I tried following the inspiration accounts. But sometimes you just need to take time or schedule time in your day that you're like, I'm not going to look at my phone. Especially during COVID, I feel like I've been online so much, and I think a lot of us feel that kind of weight. So you know, I take 2 walks a day, and I make sure they're like at least 45 minutes, and I don't take my phone with me. I try not to be on it. Just that's kind of my way of getting away from it. Does anyone else want to answer this question?
Maybe I'll just say a couple of things because I thought this was a really interesting question. Yeah, I mean, social media is, to answer this question, is really complex because different platforms are used different ways by people. I use Facebook for a lot of friends and family and personal things. Twitter is more my professional life. I also do things on Twitter. Sometimes I'm not always proud of them, but I do a lot of political work. I tag politicians I don't like. I call out employers. There's things that I have the privilege of doing because I'm in a job that has a lot of security and some protections that people searching for their first job don't have. And I think that's a big issue, is that with Twitter and social media, and we talk about this in courses I teach, it is a branding that people do as they go forward. And you brand yourself in a way that you think, you know, might get a lot of attention or make you feel like you're doing something, but it can have consequences as well. So I think being realistic about that and not letting it take over every aspect of your life. I think Rosanna's point is absolutely well, and Miranda and others who take a break. I think that's good. I'm not on Instagram or TikTok. I'm too old and they wouldn't let me on those platforms. So I'm just on Twitter and Facebook.
Thanks. Anyone else want to answer? Jen?
I'll just, yeah, super quick. I like what Miranda said in terms of, I see Facebook sometimes as it's like a false reality when you see the good news stories that are constantly posted. And what you end up doing, or at least what I would sometimes end up doing, is comparing myself. Oh, this person has this and they're doing that. But it's like, you know, I think about myself going on holidays, and I've finally taken a holiday after months, and I'm just sharing photos of where I'm at. So it's being mindful of the grass is not necessarily always greener on the other side, and there's more to those posts and images and stories than meets the eye. But for me right now, Facebook is really just a way to stay in touch with family and get a good laugh, because there's some really funny memes out there, and sometimes you need a good laugh. And then LinkedIn is where now I spend a little bit more of my time, is learning from other people and thought leaders. It's a great way to change perspectives in another positive way too.
I'm going to jump in if you don't mind, Rosanna.
Go for it.
I'm going to stretch this out a bit though, because I think I also really like this question. I thought it was great because social media is so much of the medium through which we share our interactions. But I think the bigger piece here is we're always going to come up against peer pressure. We're always going to come up against social expectations. It doesn't have to be just through social media. It's through our peers. It's through the profession we go into. I think just as an example, and I can imagine many of us struggle with this, which is the expectation that we're busy 24/7. And if you're not, what's wrong with you? You know, there's this kind of heroic sense of I'm always working. Very early on, I didn't buy into that. I don't buy into that. I think if you're always working, then you haven't scheduled your time well, or you haven't given yourself enough time to regenerate. And I think you know, those kinds of expectations, and then posting how much you're doing. Oh, I'm knitting now. Oh, I've got a puppy, and I've got this, and I also have a full-time job, and I'm nurturing all these kids. And you know, it's, I think anything where we're constantly comparing ourselves to other people is something we have to keep in check. And it's this cliche, you've got to do you, but you also don't have to buy into people telling you how this is going to be. And again, one of my pet peeves is the 24/7. You work at 24/7. And I often get people saying, oh my gosh, Alice, did you take holidays? Hell yeah, I holiday really well. And I take time off, and I take weekends off, because guess what? I can't deal with everything I need to deal unless I take time off. And I'm not going to apologize for it. And so I think just this broader issue of peer pressure and social expectations, I think, is incredibly important to set boundaries. And yes, sometimes we have to work all the time, but hopefully it's not all the time. It comes in ebbs and flows, and working to not work and working for that work-life balance is incredibly important.
That's great. I think it's important that our competition not be others, but ourselves. You know, you should look at what didn't go well before and how do I make myself better? And that way you take the focus away from focusing on other people's lives, because like everyone has mentioned here, we don't know the whole story. We only see what we post. And that's the same for celebrities, influencers, whoever it might be that you see and you feel yourself comparing. You don't see their hardships and stuff like that. So we have to remember that our competition is ourselves to do better than we did yesterday. And of course, Alice's point about vacationing and taking time for yourself is very important. You know, self-care, I vouch for that all the time. And, you know, whenever I can turn off and take time off, that's when I do it, because I know the burnout, for me, burnout comes really heavily on me. So I know when that's about to hit. So that's when I start taking my time just to kind of regenerate and get myself re-energized to go back at what I want to do. So the next question, this one is specifically for Dean Hovorka and Professor Tufts. There are many students who would like to pursue career paths as scholars and academics. What were some of the biggest challenges you experienced along the way as an academic?
Do you want me to go first, Alice? Okay. Yeah, I guess this is a really tricky one too. I mean, obviously you had to have some success at the undergraduate level to get into grad school. I think that goes without saying. But that doesn't mean that there weren't any challenges. And it doesn't mean that there aren't still barriers and challenges going forward. And for me, I think, again, trying to figure out, not having a lot of personal experience or people in my family or friends I could turn to really understand what graduate school is, or what it's about, or what the codes are. And there's a, you know, I teach this in as well about the habitus of grad school. That there's a lot of things that you cannot learn unless you are immersed in the practice, the codes of how to act, of how to engage in a classroom, of how to address professors, of how to ask for reference letters politely. There's so many things that there's just no courses for. And there's some folks that pick up this thing easily because, well, maybe their parents were academics. Or maybe they have an uncle who went to grad school. But not everyone does. And then when you compound that with relations of gender and racism in the academy, geography is still a very white discipline. It has its own codes of whiteness that we're only now starting to address seriously. I think these are barriers. The first step is to address them and then really make students comfortable with challenging them and rewriting the codes as we speak of what grad school can be and what it should be. The biggest example I think I had to learn of going to grad school is I had to learn that really, and it's a sort of a silly thing, but I had to learn that there were more than 2 kinds of wine and 1 kind of cheese. That's one way of thinking about it, that there's a whole other world out there of class signifiers of that some people just aren't familiar with, and making students familiar with those codes and teaching them how to challenge those codes, because some of them are set up to exclude. I think that's what the next step in preparing people for grad school is going to be about.
Those are some really great thoughts, Steve. Boy, what can I add to that? So I would say, I think a lot of the challenges I had academically was, I just didn't hit my stride until a certain point. I think Steve made this point earlier around, we're not always great at school, depending on where you are in your trajectory. And I was a B student. Like I was a B plus C, B student. And I really had to work. I mean, after my undergrad, I just eked my way into the grad school, like by 0.3%. I was waiting for the letter. So this is dating me now, but I was waiting for the letter at my mailbox going, please let me have gotten in. And I did. I just remember I was not brought into the master's program like everyone else was because I didn't have good enough grades. It seems to be a theme for me today. But I remember I wasn't given a TA-ship because I wasn't good enough relative to the rest of the students. And so what that meant was I had to be okay with not being the best. So it was sort of setting up the expectations of who you're with as an academic. And I was like, well, if I want to be able to do the research I want to do, I better figure out another way to get there than saving up my TA money. So I had to go and kind of hustle and find another award to apply for, a grant to apply for that wasn't based on academic merit. And I think I think academia is quite humbling and incredibly critical and has a lot of high expectations of what you're supposed to be like. And I think, all of my failures up until my PhD, when I hit my PhD, I kind of hit the ground running and never looked back because I felt this is exactly where I wanted to be. I knew it was what I wanted to do. I'd sort of left a partial career path that I thought I wanted to do behind. I was like, forget it. I want autonomy. I want to write. I want to teach, and I want to do my research. So part of this is kind of learning the expectations and whether you fit or not. And if you want to play the game, that's the other piece, is do you want to play an academic game? And I think this fits into the sort of the broader systemic comments that Steve was talking about, that if you're going to be an academic, you have to follow some clear paths of how many publications, where are they published, what do they look like, how quickly do you get them out? And if you're not willing to play the game, and I've known people who've decided one publication is enough and then they don't get tenure, but they've made those decisions because they don't want to be in the game anymore. And so part of it is a very curated, making the right choices and recognizing when you're not living up to certain expectations that you're gonna have to find a slightly other way to make it work. But honestly, some of the other just challenges of being in academia is the criticism, constantly criticized. And you've got to have a thick skin, and you have to figure out what that criticism means to you and how you're gonna navigate it. Because it's a peer-based career. You're constantly being judged by your peers. And so part of it is figuring out, is that the kind of career I want to be in? It's a career where you need lots of ideas. Am I an ideas person? And you have to be really good at writing and organizing your time. And I've seen people who cannot get themselves to sit down to write something, and they're not going to be happy in the career of being an academic. If you can't sit down and write something, this might not be the career path for you. But then again, lots of different ways for being an academic. So now I'm sort of rambling on, but there's some thoughts.
Just to add on to Alice's thought about there are different ways to become an academic. I'm doing my master in education. I don't necessarily plan to become a full-time tenured professor, but I do consider myself an academic because in the work I do, I have to do research to figure out what are the trends, what are the best practices for students. So there are different ways. This is an example of how you can take your transferable skills to something else. To wrap up the panel, this question goes out to all of you. What advice would you give to students to effectively learn to effectively learn from and reflect upon their failures, to help motivate them and to continue the process towards successful future attempts. Or you could also share what type of resources you found beneficial that helped you plan for your future steps. Anyone want to go first?
I'm happy to kick off.
Awesome.
So for advice, I would think of what I would say to my young school day self, and realizing it now, many years later, is that failure is really not all that bad. It's actually what builds resiliency. It gives you lessons that you need to figure out who you are and strategically problem solve. And what's the worst thing that can happen? You need to, I try to think about it this way. If I do this, what's the worst thing that can happen? And usually that worst thing is very unlikely to happen. And think about what regrets you might have if you didn't try something. I feel sometimes like if you're not failing, you're not trying. And so I've started to take a lot more, come out of my sort of comfort zone, and being at the edge of my comfort zone is now where I'm starting to grow and realize what my strengths and my weaknesses are. But I look back now and think, dang, man, I wish I tried that. But now is not the time. So don't be fearful. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to fall. It's all about getting back up again. And you will, because you're here. That's it.
Thanks, Jen. I like the fact that you said if you're not failing, you're not trying. Maybe now I'll turn it over to Miranda.
Sure. Yeah, I love what you said about, just like kind of trying to outweigh that sense of regret that you might feel. Sometimes it makes things very clear where you're like, I might fail and that would be really bad. But if I didn't try at all, I would regret it even more. And so that always helped me make my decisions for sure. And on the flip side, sometimes you were like, hey, if I don't want to do this anymore, would I regret it? Nope, I would have no regrets. I confidently want to stop doing this. And so that's equally important. And I think that's a really great way to weigh your value system and really see what your I guess your passion is trying to speak to you, or like your inner voice is trying to say. Because sometimes we can be propelled by a lot of other external factors and not really think and deep dive into ourselves to ask. So I think that's a great question. Another one, just building off of what everyone said, and Stephen, I really appreciate what you've said as well. Like I too didn't have anyone to ask. I was like the first and still only person who did grad school. And there is a whole different social game that you play. And I think that if you're ever in those circumstances, or if you feel like you're the first person, if there's any other like first gen Canadians out there, really like think about success in a different way. So like I would think about like my grandfather in Guyana, for example, and I never really thought of it, but he was an activist in his day, fighting for like women's rights. And that's pretty incredible. It's not academia, but it's a different type of success. And so I think just try and remember like who your ancestors are and like the successes that you bring to these spaces is just as powerful, because I know it can feel disempowering if you're like, well, no one else went to school the way that I did, but you have other amazing things that you're bringing to the table too. And I think that's pretty awesome. I think I'll leave it there at that.
Thanks, Miranda. I'll turn it over to Erin now.
Yeah, really great points. On the topic of like learning from failure, I don't know if there's a straightforward life hack for how to use failure to your advantage, but I guess one of my biggest regrets was how long I spent dwelling in my failure. I made being a failure a part of my identity as a way to cope with it. So like, if I know I'm a failure, what you tell me can't hurt me. I already know that. You can't say anything I don't already know, And it really dictated what I personally thought my future would look like. And none of these thought processes that allowed me to think that way were true. And I'm obviously still working through it today in moments where I get a good grade or I get recognition for doing something well, and I question whether someone made a mistake, because surely they can't be talking about me. But learning that my failures aren't a life sentence, but merely just a small event in the grand scheme of things, has been really useful. And also learning that since they are not a life sentence, there's still so much room to grow and evolve and improve and try again. And I've been failing academically for so long. It took me roughly 15 years to really turn things around, find my niche, respect my wants, my needs, my limits, and actually start succeeding in a visible way. And it didn't feel like it at the time, but those 15 years of failure, I was learning so much about myself and what it would actually take for me to succeed. And I know people who figured it out years earlier, obviously, and I know there's going to be people who figure it out years later, and all of those trajectories and timelines are so valid. And it's just really important to be open to the idea that failure can be a learning experience and things can turn around, especially if you are able to actually pick up on the lessons that are being provided to you through your failures. And on the note of resources, because I think this was a huge help for me in my undergrad when I did start turning my grades around, I made sure to really start taking advantage of the resources that York has offered, such as like academic advising, career counseling, thank you, Rosanna. And I tried my best to always attend office hours and have open communications with my professors whenever it was possible. And it took me a while to work up the nerve to ask for help and accept advice, but it truly made a world of difference in planning for my future steps. I wouldn't have started thinking about doing a master's degree. I'm the first one in my family to do a master's degree. I don't have anyone telling me about these things if I had not talked to my academic advisor. She planted that seed for me. And I'm so thankful. But like asking for help from these people who are there to offer it to you is not a sign of failure. It's a sign of being honest with yourself, being in touch with yourself and the reality of your situation and taking the steps necessary to set yourself up for success. So, yeah.
Some very great points, Erin. I'll turn it over to Professor Tufts.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot said that I don't want to repeat, but I will reframe one thing a little bit differently, and that is sometimes what we think of as failure isn't failure at all. It's just a different type of experience. And, you know, when I graduated my undergrad in the early 1990s, the Canadian economy was in the tank. There was a recession. There just weren't jobs for young people at that time. So, and I was, you know, sort of went to grad school, finished my master's, really wasn't sure then what I wanted to do. And if I wanted to go all the way with the PhD yet. I was in my early 20s still, still figuring things out. So, you know, and there weren't a lot of other jobs, but I found a job managing a bar. And when I say managing a bar, I'm putting that nicely. This was a very seedy establishment. If you take a course with me, and I actually talk about this. And yeah, it could have been seen as a time, why is a guy with a master's degree managing a seedy bar? But it let me figure things out and make sure I really wanted to go ahead and do a PhD before investing that time. So doing things that are setbacks or off not taking a linear path isn't always a bad thing. And I don't think it should be constituted as failure. If I lecture about that 1 or 2 year experience and use it as material to teach somebody something, is that necessarily a failure? Can we think about it differently? So I think really realizing there's in the current economy and society we live in, there's just a range of diverse paths that people take to get where they want to go.
Thanks. And lastly, we'll have Dean Hovorka share her thoughts.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone for being so candid and brave on this topic. I wanted to offer two kind of different perspectives on failure. And I think I'm really struck by Erin's comments because I do, you know, many people struggle with the idea of failure or feeling like they are failing. And that can be a really dark place. That moment for me was when I ironically achieved what I had wanted, which was a full-time tenure-track job at the University of Guelph. I was like, this is it, I wanted this. And then they pushed me in front of 500 students and they said, teach these students some stuff. And I would say, I don't remember anymore if it was a year and a half or 2 years, but I felt like a constant failure in that classroom, to the point where I would start crying on a Friday night because I had a Monday lecture to give. And I got into a really dark place where I thought, I don't belong here. They hate me. And my partner, who I'm still with, he was like, ask them how it's going. Do a stop, start, continue. He was trying to push me out of my comfort zone. I was like, nope, nope, nope. And I was white knuckling. Every semester I would white knuckle. And he said, and everyone was telling me, it's okay, all my friends, all my family, you're good, you're good, you're good. And I remember one semester got really bad and I was in a really dark place. And my partner finally said, you have to get help. And I did. I listened to him and I went to a counselor. And they helped me work through all the things I was feeling. And it was things that I had brought up for myself. And when I had even shared with my chair at the time. I was brave enough to share with my chair. And he came in when the course evaluations came in and he said, Alice, these are one of the highest course evaluations I've seen. And he said, what happened to you? Because you completely melted down in the semester and I had created my own reality. And, this is just one example of the way failure can really eat away at you. And so I would encourage everyone to reach out to whoever that is. And there are tons of supports for mental health and well-being. And it doesn't mean that, for example, for myself, I don't have a lifelong condition with anxiety, but it was a moment where I was struggling. And it can be momentary and you can pull yourself out, but you have to find a way to do that. So that's kind of one piece to really encourage people. If you're feeling like a failure or you are failing, reach out and get some help to help people reorient your experience. But then the other piece is failure. I think I now look at failure, and this might be just the years as they add up for me. I look at failure as lifelong learning. And there's so many moments in my day where I'm making decisions and they come back to me as, nope, you're not going to do that. And I go, okay, I could see that as a failure, but I don't, right? I can imagine there were some moments when we were trying to figure out what the name of this faculty would be. And I proposed something and I kind of made a big kind of splash and it came back at me at a faculty council. No, Alice, we're not doing this. Okay, what do we need to get us all on the right page? And so, there's so many moments in the day where we're making big decisions and it might be getting in our way. So those little failures, it's thinking of them as lifelong learning. And yeah, that sounds a bit cheesy, but, and resiliency, I think, might be overused these days, but it's trying to recognize that you need to be open-minded and open to the possibilities that where you're headed is not quite the right direction. It might need to be reoriented. So thank you for letting me share these thoughts.
Thank you all for sharing such great insights and advice for our students. I feel like some key takeaways is discomfort is growth. It helps us grow as an individual. Don't compete against others, compete against yourself. Pave your own path. Don't let failure become your identity. Failure is more of an experience, a different type of experience that will help you achieve your goals. And I think we have some great advice. I've learned a lot today. Dean Hovorka was talking about talking to others. It doesn't have to be a counselor. It could be, your academic advisor, the professors, your peer mentors. Jen put some great tips in the chat for students to take advantage of. But I'll give you an example. I have mentor meetings with Alice, and that has helped me overcome. It's part of the reason I've learned to learn from my own failures and not feel like I'm failing at what I'm doing and that this is it, I'm failing, I'm going to lose my job. No, it's helping us grow as individuals. So, reaching out, making mentors, making friends, even the student clubs. We have some great student clubs at EUC that you can take a part of. It's a great community. Even I enjoy talking to the students. I learn from them as well. So there are many resources for you to take advantage of and not feel like this is the end, that you cannot do something. It just means you need to take another approach at it. So what we'll do, the next session is basically we're going to do some speed networking with each of the panelists. We'll have 3 different groups. Basically, first, Dean Hovorka and Professor Tufts will be in one room. Erin and Miranda will be in another one. And actually, I'm going to put Erin, Miranda, and Jen in one room. And what we'll do is we'll do 2 15-minute sessions. But before we start that, how about we take a 5-minute break? So if everyone can come back at 3:10, and then we'll start the speed networking session.